first love returns to threaten our marriage. I reveal her true identity. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The woman sobbing in my living room wasn't my husband's tragic first love. She was a phantom. I stood by the fireplace, my arms crossed, watching the pathetic display unfold. Mark, my husband of 5 years, was trembling. He was staring at the thick manila folder I had just slammed onto our glass coffee table, his eyes darting frantically between the glossy pages of legal documents and the weeping woman cowering on our expensive suede sofa. "Mark, please," Chloe gasped, wiping away a perfectly timed tear. "She's crazy. She manufactured all of this because she's threatened by our history. You know me. Have you ever watched the person you love look at someone else with pure pity? It's a sickening feeling. For months, I had been the villain in my own home. I was the jealous, insecure wife trying to keep a desperate, abused woman from getting back on her feet. Mark believed he was a savior. He believed he was rescuing the sweet, innocent girl he took to prom 14 years ago. He didn't know that my day job as a senior data analyst trained me to see patterns where others see chaos. I don't operate on emotions. I operate on hard, irrefutable data. And the data sitting on that table, court transcripts, property deeds, and a damning obituary, proved that Chloe was a calculated predator. "Look at the dates, Mark," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Look at the alias on the LLC. Look at the signature. I am a fiercely protective woman. When Mark and I built our life together in this quiet, comfortable suburb, we promised total transparency. We had a beautiful home, thriving careers, and a deep, unshakable trust. Or so I thought. The betrayal wasn't just that he had lied to me, hid late-night text messages, or tried to secretly funnel our life savings into a fraudulent offshore account. The ultimate betrayal was that he let an absolute stranger convince him that I was the enemy. As Mark's hands shook, flipping to the page containing a police report from 3 states away, the silence in the room became absolutely deafening. I watched the realization wash over his face, erasing months of careful brainwashing. But to understand how we got here, I have to take you back 3 months. Mark and I had what our friends jokingly called an annoyingly perfect marriage. We met in our late 20s, well past the dramatic phases of our youth. Mark is a successful structural engineer, logical, steady, but with a massive soft spot for underdogs. I've always loved that about him. He rescues stray dogs, tips absurdly well, and fundamentally believes the best in people. I, on the other hand, am the pragmatist. As a researcher, I trust people exactly as far as I can verify their credentials. It was a balance that worked flawlessly for us. Our evenings usually consisted of cooking dinner together, complaining about our respective bosses, and planning our upcoming trips. We had solid boundaries and no secrets. Then, out of nowhere, the ghost appeared. We were in bed reading when Mark's phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was past 11. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and typed a quick reply before setting it face down. "Who is texting you this late?" I asked, barely looking up from my book. "Just an old friend," Mark said casually, though I noticed a slight tension in his shoulders. "Chloe, from high school. We haven't spoken in over a decade." I knew about Chloe. She was his first serious girlfriend, the one who broke his heart when she left for college and never looked back. I felt a tiny prick of annoyance, but I brushed it off. What does she want at 11 on a Tuesday? She just found me on Instagram, said she's going through a really rough patch, and just wanted to reach out to a familiar face. No big deal. But it wasn't just a quick catch-up. Over the next week, Mark's phone began buzzing constantly. He'd take it into the bathroom with him. He'd stay up later than usual, sitting in the dark living room, typing furiously. When I asked him about it, he'd sigh heavily, running a hand through his hair, looking deeply burdened. He told me Chloe was trapped in an abusive marriage, completely isolated, and terrified for her life. I felt sympathy, of course, but also a growing unease about why she was leaning so heavily on my husband. I had no idea that simple notification would be the beginning of my absolute nightmare. 2 weeks after that initial message, Mark came home from work looking completely exhausted. He dropped his briefcase by the door and walked straight to the kitchen island, pouring himself a large glass of water. "Chloe is in town," he blurted out, not meeting my eyes. I paused, the vegetable peeler freezing in my hand. "In town? Here?" Why? She fled, Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. She grabbed whatever fit in a duffel bag and just drove. She's staying at that cheap motel by the interstate. I went to meet her for coffee today after work. Just to check on her, Sarah. Just to make sure she was safe. Have you ever felt the ground subtly shift beneath your feet? I didn't care that he got coffee with an ex. I cared that he did it secretly. He spent hours listening to her tragic sob story. According to Mark, Chloe's husband controlled all her finances, monitored her calls, and had recently become violently unpredictable. She had no family left, no friends she could trust, and her credit was entirely frozen. Sarah, she looks terrible, Mark pleaded, finally looking at me. His eyes were wide, filled with that savior complex I usually loved, but now it felt dangerous. She's terrified. She was shaking the entire time we sat in the diner. She has literally nothing to her name and nowhere else to turn. That's awful, Mark, truly, I said, trying to keep my voice measured. We can look up some local women's shelters or domestic abuse resources for her. I can help her make some calls tomorrow. Mark flinched as if I had slapped him. Shelters? Sarah, she's not a statistic. She's someone I care about. Someone I've known for half my life. She's completely broken right now. She can't handle a sterile government facility. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the logical engineer I married with the frantic man standing before me. The boundaries of our marriage were suddenly blurring, overshadowed by the massive, overwhelming presence of a woman I had never even met. He looked at me with teary eyes and asked the question that ruined our peace. Can she stay in our guest room? Just for a few nights until she figures out a plan. The question hung in the air like toxic smoke. I immediately said no. I explained that bringing a volatile, potentially dangerous situation, an abusive husband tracking her, into our home was crossing a massive line. Mark argued, but eventually conceded. I thought that was the end of it, but the intrusion only escalated. The late-night emergency call started. My phone would show 2 a.m., and Mark would be whispering frantically in the hallway. Chloe was having a panic attack. Chloe thought someone was following her. Chloe's tire blew out, and she didn't know how to change it. Every crisis required Mark's immediate, undivided attention. He was perpetually exhausted, snappy with me, and totally consumed by her drama. The breaking point happened on a Thursday. I was working from home, organizing a massive data set for a client, when I noticed my laptop charger was missing. I went into Mark's home office to grab his spare. While I was plugging it in, his iPad pinged. I shouldn't have looked, but the notification practically screamed at me. It was a text from Chloe. Thank you so much for the lifeline. The hotel manager was going to kick me out. I promise I'll pay you back when the divorce is final. You are my actual hero, Mark. My heart slammed against my ribs. Lifeline? Hotel manager? I immediately opened my laptop and navigated to our joint banking portal. We kept our main savings separate, but we had a shared account for mortgage payments, vacations, and emergency repairs. We had carefully built that fund together over 3 years of hard work and budgeting. My hands were physically shaking as the transaction history finally loaded on my screen. He had moved money without telling me. I checked our joint account the next morning and saw a transfer that froze me. $5,000. Mark had sent Chloe $5,000 of our shared money without a single word to me. When he got home that evening, I didn't yell. I simply placed a printout of the bank statement on his dinner plate. What is this, Mark? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Instead of apologizing, he immediately went on the defensive. She was going to be out on the street, Sarah. Her lawyer needed a retainer to start the protective orders. It's a loan. She's going to pay it back with interest once her marital assets are unfrozen. You lied to me, I stated plainly. You stole from our joint account. I didn't steal anything. I was going to tell you, but I knew you'd react exactly like this, he snapped, pacing the kitchen. You've been hostile toward her since day one. You lack basic empathy. Honestly, your jealousy over someone I dated in high school is making you paranoid and completely irrational. Gaslighting is a slow poison. Hearing my usually supportive husband call me irrational and jealous made me question my own reality. Was I being cruel? Was my demand for boundaries actually just insecurity? The isolation set in quickly. Mark stopped discussing his day with me, entirely devoting his mental energy to Chloe's ongoing soap opera. Desperate for a reality check, I called Becca, Mark's younger sister. We met at a local bakery. The moment I mentioned Chloe's name and the loan, Becca dropped her fork, her expression hardening instantly. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully," Becca said, leaning across the table. "Chloe is not a victim. She has never been a victim in her entire life. She played Mark like a fiddle in high school, drained his savings for her emergencies, and cheated on him constantly." Becca looked around the crowded bakery before leaning in even closer, dropping her voice to an urgent whisper. "The woman my husband was currently trying to save was a master manipulator." Becca grabbed my arm and whispered a secret about Chloe that made my blood freeze. "Chloe doesn't just burn bridges. She torches the whole city," Becca warned me. "Right before she left for college, she faked a pregnancy scare to force Mark to pay for a procedure that never happened. She used the money to buy a car. When I found out and tried to tell him, she cried and manipulated him into cutting me off for 6 months. I left that bakery with absolute clarity. I wasn't crazy. I was dealing with a professional. I decided to change my tactics. If I kept fighting Mark, he would only protect her more. I had to get close to the enemy. I texted Mark and told him I wanted to apologize to Chloe in person. I invited her to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. Mark was overjoyed, completely oblivious to my actual motives. He thought his wife and his first love were finally going to bond. Chloe arrived wearing an oversized, threadbare sweater, perfectly styled to look destitute but brave. She spent the first 40 minutes monopolizing the conversation with her harrowing tales of escape. Her abusive husband, Greg, was a wealthy tech executive in Seattle who tracked her phone and controlled her bank accounts. "It's just so hard," she sniffled, reaching for Mark's hand across the table. He let her hold it. "Greg has friends in the Seattle Police Department. That's why I couldn't report the abuse there. I had to flee Washington entirely just to breathe." My analytical brain quietly filed away the data points. Tech executive, Seattle, Washington State Police. Then, she made her fatal mistake. The waiter came by to ask if we were celebrating anything. Chloe offered a wistful, tragic smile. "Just surviving. It's been exactly 3 years since my wedding day. I should be celebrating an anniversary today, but instead, I'm just hiding." 3 years. Married in Washington State. A tech executive named Greg. I smiled sympathetically, offering to pay the bill while secretly memorizing every single detail she had just handed to me on a silver platter. She smiled over her wine glass, unaware that she had just given me the key. The minute Mark fell asleep that night, I took my laptop into the guest bedroom and locked the door. My job is literally data extraction and verification. People leave digital footprints everywhere, even when they are actively trying to hide them. You just have to know exactly where to look. I started with marriage records in King County, Washington, filtering for the last 3 years. I searched for a bride named Chloe and a groom named Gregory. Nothing. I expanded the search to the entire state of Washington. Still absolutely 0 hits. I frowned, tapping my fingernails against the desk. Either they were married in a different state, or she was lying about the timeline. Or, the most likely scenario, she was lying about everything. I moved on to reverse image searching. Chloe had a sparse Instagram profile, but I found an older photo of her standing in front of a distinct brick building, tagged 3 years ago. I cropped the building and ran it through a visual database. It wasn't in Seattle. It was a boutique hotel in Austin, Texas. Next, I ran a comprehensive background check using her maiden name, full date of birth, and previous known addresses that Becca had provided me. The report took 20 minutes to compile. When the PDF finally generated, I poured a second cup of coffee and started highlighting the discrepancies. Chloe had never lived in Washington State. There was no record of a marriage license anywhere in the Pacific Northwest. However, she did have a registered LLC in Texas under the name Chloe Vance Consulting, which had been flagged multiple times for unpaid state taxes. She also had 2 civil judgments against her for unpaid rent in Arizona and Nevada. She wasn't fleeing an abusive tech executive. She was hopping from state to state, leaving a massive trail of financial wreckage in her wake. I realized that my husband was not rescuing a victim. He was actively funding a fugitive. The deeper I dug into her supposed tragic history, the darker the truth actually became. I spent the next 3 nights surviving on pure adrenaline and black coffee, operating as a ghost in my own house. Mark continued his hushed phone calls, firmly believing his wife was finally coming around to his charity project. He had no idea I was assembling a digital dossier that could destroy her. While scouring public property records linked to her old addresses in Texas, I finally found a connection to a man named Gregory. It wasn't a marriage certificate, it was a joint lease agreement from 5 years ago. Gregory Vance. I quickly plugged his name into the National Registry, cross-referencing it with the Austin, Texas location. A local news article popped up in the search results. My breath hitched as I read the headline. Gregory Vance, a 38-year-old local restaurant manager, had been involved in a fatal multi-car collision on Interstate 35. I clicked through to the full obituary published by the Austin American-Statesman. It listed his surviving family members, his hobbies, and confirmed his tragic passing. I sat back in my chair, staring blindly at the glowing screen. Chloe had spun a horrifying narrative about a powerful, abusive tech mogul who was currently hunting her down across state lines. She used this story to manipulate my husband's emotions, drain our joint savings account, and infiltrate our marriage. She claimed she was living in absolute terror of a man who was tracking her every move. I downloaded the obituary, the police report from the crash, and the coroner's public press release. I saved everything into a securely encrypted folder on my hard drive. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost impressive. She wasn't just exaggerating a bad relationship to get sympathy. She was utilizing a ghost to commit massive financial fraud against my husband. I printed the documents, feeling the heavy weight of the paper in my hands. The man she claimed was currently hunting her down had been buried for 5 years. Finding out that her abusive husband was deceased proved she was a liar, but it didn't explain her endgame. $5,000 was a lot of money, but for a grifter with her extensive history of state hopping and civil judgments, it was just a drop in the bucket. She was playing a much longer game, and I needed to know exactly what the final prize was. The answer fell right into my lap. Mark had grown sloppy. Empowered by my recent understanding behavior, he left his personal iPad unlocked on the kitchen counter while he took a shower. I tapped the screen, opening his email app. There, sitting at the very top of his inbox, was a message from a commercial lending broker. The subject line read, "Urgent, signature required for guarantor agreement." I opened the email, my stomach plummeting to the floor. It was a massive, high-risk commercial business loan application for a boutique wellness center in downtown. The primary applicant was Chloe, the listed financial guarantor, the person legally responsible for paying back the entire sum if the business failed, was Mark. She wasn't just asking for petty cash to survive a hotel stay. She was manipulating my husband into co-signing a legally binding document that would essentially put our home, our remaining savings, and our future credit on the chopping block. The loan amount was utterly staggering. If Chloe defaulted, which, given her history of tax evasion and unpaid judgments, was practically a guarantee, the bank would immediately come after us for the full balance. I forwarded the email to my own secure account and deleted the forwarded trace from his outbox. I listened to the water running in the shower, feeling a cold, terrifying rage settling into my bones. He was actually going to do it. My husband was 48 hours away from signing away every single cent of our future. I had the proof of her lies, and I had the motive, but I knew Mark. He was so deeply brainwashed by his savior complex that if I just showed him the obituary, Chloe would spin it. She would cry, claim she used a fake name to protect him, or invent some other chaotic excuse. I needed a witness. I needed someone who had already survived the exact trap Mark was stepping into. I went back to the civil judgments on her background report. The lawsuit in Nevada caught my eye. It was filed by a man named David Harrison. I used my researcher access to pull the court docket. David had sued Chloe 2 years ago for fraud and breach of contract after co-signing a lease for a startup venture that she immediately abandoned. It took me 3 hours to find David's current contact information. I called him on my lunch break. When I mentioned Chloe's name, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "I lost my business and my fiancée because of that woman," David said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "She finds guys who want to feel like heroes. She gives them a tragic story, isolates them from their partners, and bleeds them dry." I explained what was happening with Mark. I told him about the commercial loan. David wasn't surprised, he was angry. She ran the exact same playbook on me. She used a fake abusive ex named Richard. She needed a loan to get back on her feet. I have all the old text messages and emails she sent me. They are almost identical. She literally copies and pastes the same tragic scripts. I begged David to help me save my husband from making a catastrophic mistake. I needed Mark to see that he wasn't special. He was just a gullible target in a recycled con. That evening, my phone chimed with a heavy attachment. David sent me an audio file that completely shattered the last of my husband's defenses. The audio file was a voicemail Chloe had left David 2 years ago. Her voice was exactly the same. Fragile, trembling, filled with tears. She begged David to help her hide from her violent ex, using the exact same emotional phrasing she was currently using on Mark. It was the final nail in her coffin. Now, I just had to execute the exposure perfectly. I approached Mark in the kitchen that night. I put on my best understanding, supportive wife face, swallowing down the immense disgust I felt. "Mark, I've been thinking," I said softly. "I know I've been incredibly hard on Chloe, but I see how much this means to you, and I want to support you. If you are going to co-sign that loan for her wellness center, we should do it properly, as a united team." Mark's jaw practically dropped. He pulled me into a huge hug, thanking me profusely for finally seeing the light. "But," I added, pulling back slightly and looking him dead in the eye, "we need to protect our assets. I want to meet with Chloe and my lawyer, Mr. Vance, at his office to sign the guarantor papers, just to make sure the legal boundaries are airtight." Mark eagerly agreed. He immediately texted Chloe the good news, telling her that his wife was finally on board and that they would finalize the funding on Friday afternoon. She replied with a string of heart emojis, praising his incredible loyalty. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully manipulated the nagging wife into submission and secured her massive payday. She had absolutely no idea that Mr. Vance wasn't a real estate lawyer. He didn't even exist. Vance was the last name of her deceased husband, a tiny psychological breadcrumb I dropped just for my own amusement. I smiled at my husband and set a trap that she would never see coming. Thursday morning, 24 hours before the trap was scheduled to spring, things almost fell apart completely. Con artists possess a sixth sense when a mark is about to wake up, and Chloe was absolutely no exception. My sudden, uncharacteristic pivot from hostile wife to supportive partner had apparently spooked her. It was too easy, and she instinctively knew it. I was at work, reviewing a complex data spreadsheet, when Mark called me. He sounded incredibly stressed and out of breath. "Sarah, Chloe is having a massive crisis. The contractor for her commercial space says if she doesn't put down a $20,000 deposit by noon today, she loses the lease entirely. She is having a total breakdown." My blood ran ice cold. "Mark, we are meeting the lawyer tomorrow. The loan will cover the deposit." "She can't wait until tomorrow," Mark argued, his voice rising in panic. "She's completely devastated. I was thinking, I could just wire her the 20 grand from our emergency fund today, and she can reimburse us on Monday when the commercial loan officially clears." She was trying to bypass the meeting. She wanted the untraceable cash directly in her personal account, so she could vanish into thin air before Friday afternoon. "Mark, absolutely not," I said, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level despite the sheer panic radiating through my chest. "If you wire personal funds to a commercial escrow, it severely complicates the guarantor agreement. Mr. Vance specifically warned me that doing that could void the bank's insurance policy. Tell her to stall the contractor. Just one more day?" There was a long, agonizing pause. I could hear him pacing the floor of his office. The emotional brainwashing was actively fighting against my cold logic. If he logged into that banking portal right now, everything I had worked for would be completely ruined. My phone buzzed with an alert from the bank, meaning she was making her move. It was just an automated balance update, not a transfer alert. Mark had actually listened to me. He told Chloe she had to wait until Friday. Friday afternoon finally arrived. I didn't book a real lawyer's office. I booked a private, glass-walled conference room at a high-end corporate co-working space to make the environment look intimidating and official. Mark and I arrived first. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy, eager to finally save his damsel in distress. Chloe walked in 10 minutes later, clutching a fake designer bag, wearing her signature, brave but broken expression. She hugged Mark tightly, pointedly ignoring me, and sat down at the heavy oak table. "So, where's Mr. Vance?" Chloe asked, looking around the empty, silent room with a sweet, innocent smile. "He couldn't make it," I said smoothly, unzipping my leather briefcase. But he sent over the mandatory background verification documents required for the final commercial loan approval. I didn't pull out a contract. I pulled out a thick stack of glossy papers. First, I placed the comprehensive background check on the table, highlighting her massive trail of unpaid civil judgments and the flagged Texas LLC. Mark stared at it, deep confusion wrinkling his forehead. Chloe's sweet smile instantly vanished, replaced by a rigid, terrifying blankness. Next, I pulled out my phone, connected it to the room's Bluetooth speaker, and hit play. David's old voicemail echoed loudly through the pristine conference room. Chloe's own recorded voice begged David for financial help against her violent ex, reciting the exact same emotional script she had used on Mark just 3 weeks ago. Mark physically recoiled, his face turning an ashen gray. He looked at Chloe, then at the speaker, his entire reality violently fracturing. Chloe leaped up, screaming that I had fabricated the audio, that I was an insane, jealous psychopath trying to completely ruin her life. I tossed the real death certificate on the table and watched the color drain away. Gregory Vance, I said, tapping the official coroner's report, died in a horrific car accident 5 years ago in Austin, Texas. That is incredibly inconvenient for your current storyline, considering you claimed he chased you through the streets of Seattle last month. The silence in the conference room was absolute. The fragile victim routine evaporated in a split second. Chloe didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness or offer a single excuse. Instead, her posture straightened, her shoulders squared, and a vicious, deeply mocking sneer spread across her face. The carefully crafted mask had completely slipped. She looked at Mark, who was visibly hyperventilating, staring at the glossy death certificate as if it were a venomous snake. "You are absolutely pathetic, Mark," Chloe spat, her voice dripping with pure venom, entirely devoid of the trembling vulnerability she had weaponized for weeks. "You always were a gullible, weak little boy desperately playing the hero. It took me 3 text messages to get you to steal from your own wife. 3. You practically threw your money at me just to feel like a big man." Mark let out a choked, devastated sound. He had completely destroyed our trust, isolated me from our friends, and nearly bankrupted our entire future for a woman who was now openly laughing at his profound stupidity. "And you," Chloe said, turning her dead, cold eyes toward me. "You think you won? I already spent the $5,000. Consider it an idiot tax." She grabbed her fake designer bag, kicked her chair back violently, and stormed out of the glass room, leaving an ocean of absolute devastation in her wake. I calmly gathered the printed evidence, placing it neatly back into my leather briefcase. I didn't feel victorious or triumphant. I just felt incredibly tired. I looked down at the man I had built my life with. My husband fell to his knees as the woman he pitied laughed in his face. The aftermath was brutally painful. Mark was a completely shattered man. He had to face the terrifying reality that his massive ego, cleverly disguised as a noble savior complex, had almost destroyed our entire lives. The $5,000 he wired her was gone forever, but the psychological damage to our marriage was infinitely more expensive. For several months, we lived like polite, cautious strangers in our own home. I demanded full, unmitigated transparency. I immediately took sole control of all our household finances, changing every banking password and setting up rigorous daily transaction alerts. Mark agreed to everything without a single complaint or argument. He started intense individual therapy to understand exactly why he was so easily manipulated by toxic nostalgia and the dangerous desire to feel needed by a broken person. Couples counseling is incredibly exhausting. Earning back shattered trust isn't a grand, cinematic moment. It's a grueling, painful daily grind of proving yourself over and over again. Slowly, very slowly, the thick ice between us began to thaw. Mark proved his deep remorse through consistent, humble, and transparent actions. We are still together today, but the naive, blindly trusting version of our marriage is permanently dead. We replaced it with something much stronger, built on hard boundaries and absolute verification. If there is a crucial lesson in my absolute nightmare, it's this: nostalgia is a dangerous, blinding drug. Just because you knew someone intimately in high school does not mean you know who they are today. People change, And sometimes they morph into calculated predators who use your fond memories as a weapon to drain you dry. Trust your gut. If your partner is crossing boundaries to rescue someone, do not let them gaslight you into silence. Demand the truth, verify the facts, and never apologize for fiercely protecting your own home. We survived the storm, but I will never forget the phantom who tried to break us.